So we're now at the sixth lesson. And the fifth statement is, I made you into a model nation, but what a mess, right? Do a little head shake there, be like, what a mess. What a mess, right? So far, right, we've had statement one was, what was the first statement? Adam writes a PhD dissertation, becomes a king. What's the second statement? Remember, the real king is me. Yeah. And the third statement? I will make a nation for myself among the history of nations. Yeah. Great. So God's like, all right, people, law, land, I'm going to make my own. All right. So what's the fourth statement? Yeah, we have the people, so now I will establish the law and give you the land, okay? So now we have that, right? Because people, we have people from Genesis, right? In the beginning of Exodus, we have people. Law, we got Leviticus throughout Exodus, okay? And the land, we got in Numbers. Yeah, we just saw that, right? Okay, so, well, we got half of the land. Now we got the remainder of the land, okay? So lesson 6 is going to be about the remainder of the land. And also, man, I made you into a model nation, but what a mess, okay? All right, so at this point, so right now we're sitting on the plains of Moab. We've listened to Moses go on and on and on and on. Okay, Moses, we get it. You can die now, right? Maybe not that bad, but okay. So we're like, okay, Moses, we've heard your sermon twice. Okay, we're good. And we're all sitting on the plains of Moab, ready to go into battle, right? But we're still there, and we're still here. Okay. Before we go into Joshua and the conquest of Canaan, we're stopping a little bit to examine what the culture of Canaan is like here. So this is the lesson where we're examining the culture of Canaan and the relationship between that culture and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, okay? So relationship between the Canaan culture and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, okay? Before we go into Joshua and the conquest, okay? All right, so we're sitting on the plains of Moab, about to enter into Joshua and the conquest of the western side. Did God give information about what the land of Canaan is going to be like? Yes. Okay. So where was that information found? So he already gave them the book of the law, right? And contained in Leviticus, which they received in Sinai Peninsula about 40 years ago, right, as a people, they received a lot of information about what they can expect when they go into Canaan, right? We can find those hints in Leviticus and also in Moses' sermon, Deuteronomy, right? So we're going to look at that first part. And the second question we're going to look at is, why did God command the Israelites to kill all the people in certain cities, right? This is that genocide question that we talked about at the very beginning of our retreat, right? This is a key question that I think if you're any believer who loves the Word and who is studying it, right, this is a question that all of us should ask at some point, right? If you haven't asked so already. So Leviticus is info for an identity education, right? So God gives them information about, all right, your spiritual life, your physical life, and your social or cultural life in Leviticus. So in Leviticus, God trains up his people. It's not just do this and don't do that. It's not just a list. It's also a very educational book, right? By which God trains his people before they go into this land and start running a nation, right? And so he gives them information first about spiritual life, about offerings and holidays, right? Different kinds of offerings to make, what kind and what time, or which days of the year to go and celebrate together and teach the kids what Yahweh has done, right? So spiritual life education, it's a textbook, right? For these people who are about to go and do this whole new nation thing, right? So Leviticus received back in Mount Sinai, right? We're stopping at the plains of Moab and we're looking into Leviticus now, okay, even though it was received back there in Exodus, okay? And Leviticus also is a textbook about the physical life, right? So God's really serious about this nation thing, right? He wants a physical nation, physical community of people that represent the kingdom of God, right? To all of the nations. So he wants them to survive and have sanitation, right? And have proper like health rules, right? And so he says things like, don't eat shellfish in the Mediterranean region. It's a bad idea. Okay, you might die of food poisoning very, very soon. We don't want that, right? You know how long it took me to get you to where you are, right? Don't die from, shellfish, right? And pork, right? It rots easily in the region. Health law, sanitation, right? What happens when someone's sick, right? Like take them away from the camp, right? Pray over them until they come back, and until they can come back, they're whole again, right? There's these physical laws as well, right? He's like, let's really make this nation thing happen, right? He cares about that stuff too, right? And then there's the social life, info on how to live together. And there's laws on property, right? What to do when someone's ox kills another ox, right? Because they're like all these people are living together. So what happens when those clashes happen, right? There's laws on how to govern social life. And there's also laws on the missional life or a cultural life when you go into Canaan, right? So the cultural life, the Canaanite religion has a lot to do with fertility, right? So you know the famous ones, Baal and Asherah, right? There's also Dagon, Chemosh, Molech, Ashtaroth. Ashtaroth is kind of the plural or a different form of Asherah. But these are fertility gods, right? Meaning they represent a certain type of religion where usually the male god represents the sky or the heavens, and the female goddess, the counterpart, represents the earth, right? And their union is what brings rain and crops and children and more cows and more livestock, more sheep and more wealth and life and security for the people who worship these gods. So Canaanite religion is a fertility religion. This is the Venus of Willendorf. It's a very, very ancient Canaanite figure that represents an exaggeration, right, of very fertile female parts, right? Like this woman's ready to have babies and feed them and right have more babies, and it's an exaggeration, but it's just it's an everyday act of worship and religious life, right? To worship human fertility, right, above other things. Like we might look at this and be like, why would you worship that, right? But I don't think we're too far off in our culture from worshiping fertility and more money and more sex and more control over our security and happiness, right? I don't think we're too far off, right? And somehow in this culture of we want more, 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 right, what happens to the human body? It gets exaggerated in different forms, right? Maybe we do it in different forms. Maybe it looks more like, I won't do it, but like it's, but for our culture, right, this is kind of far from our culture, but it's also very close, right? We have supermodel culture everywhere, right? They sell everything from health insurance to toothpaste, right? They represent money and status and power from men, right? And they represent fertility and well-being for all of the nations, right? It's like, oh, you can have one of those, right? Have one of those bodies, own one of those bodies, right? I think we do the same thing of worshiping sex and fertility, but just in a really different format. Our restroom signs for male and female come from Baal and Asherah, where Baal is always like holding some kind of an arrow because he's the thunder god, sending down rain, right, and thunder to make crops grow. And Asherah is the one kind of holding this holding some kind of I think it says like, 방패 is a shield. Yeah, shield, yeah. So our symbols in everyday life that we use come from, fertility cult religions, right? Yin and yang. Well, we see this a lot too. It also is the Eastern version of this fertility religion. It's found all over the world, right? In every agricultural society, right? We have fertility religions where heaven, male, right? Earth, female, their union brings together more crops, more children, more wealth, right? Worship these gods, right? And the fertility goddesses of the ancient Near East, there's lots of variations, but they're in the same line, right? It's also interesting that they're also gods who rule over chaos and water and death, right? It's the goddess that protects you from chaos and water and death. So is it Baal or is it Yahweh who's going to protect you from chaos and water and death and give you eternal life, give you a life without death, right? So the Israelites thought, they didn't deny God. They thought that God, Yahweh, definitely was a powerful God. They'd seen and witnessed a lot of things, right? They heard this tradition. But they also thought maybe it doesn't hurt to add a little something else, right? It doesn't hurt to add a little bit something else and like maybe worship a little bit of the other gods too, who could provide extra insurance and security against all the bad things that could happen in my life, yeah? So they weren't like lovers of Baal and haters of Yahweh. They just loved both, right? And I think in our culture too, like it's not like we hate God and love money. Like we love God. We also love money and sex and controlling those things, right? The love of money is the root of many kinds of evil, right? And you cannot worship both God and money at the same time, right? You got to choose one, right? So when Jesus says these things, it's, it's like we go way back, right? Is it me or is it the money? Is it me or is it the sex, right? Like it goes way back, this question that God poses to us. All right, so some more fertility goddesses. So this is a little point on the Song of Songs, right, on the Speh, right? So a blessing on this is a holy hymn for the holy marriage between the king of the king Idin Dagan, who's a Mesopotamian king, and the goddess Inanna, right? This is goddess Inanna of Samaria, okay? Listen to this a little bit and see how it's similar to the Song of Songs, okay? As you caress the Lord, give life unto the Lord, give the staff and crook, which the shepherd symbol, which symbolizes kingship to the Lord, right? So give kingship to our king. May the Lord whom you have called to your heart, right, the king, your beloved husband, enjoy long days at your holy lap, the sweet. Give him a reign favorable and glorious. Give him the throne of kingship on its enduring foundation. Give him the people. Give him an enduring crown. May he make productive the fields like the farmer. May he multiply the sheepfolds like a trustworthy shepherd. Under his reign, may there be plants. May there be grain. May there be cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. May there be money, right? May our nation be blessed, right? So this is the difference between Song of Songs, right? Between Yahweh culture and Canaanite culture, Mesopotamian culture. Right, the surrounding culture that the Israelites are living and breathing in, right? This is what the surrounding is, and then God's like, you're different, right? Don't forget that. Yeah. Yes, okay. So in Jesus' miracles, right, he does things like he calms the storm, he controls rain and thunder, right? He's like, it's about me, not Baal, right? And Jesus, he reigns over death and chaos because the sea also represents death in this context, right? He resurrects from the dead and he resurrects other people from the dead. He provides food in abundance, right? He heals the sick. He's the true God of fertility and well-being and life and has power over death, right? Jesus could have done a lot of different types of miracles, right? But he's in the business of giving people life because that's what Yahweh's been about all along. And he's like, it's all right here, people. Don't go to these other gods, right? That's what Yahweh's been saying. And that's what Jesus shows with his miracles, right? I am, right, the good shepherd. I am the vine, right? He says the same things that Yahweh says, like, I am, I am, I am. And then he does these miracles, right? Say, I am the God of life. So more about fertility, religion, we see it everywhere, right? And this Koreans, there's also, we get from the Chinese culture this idea of a goddess living on the moon who guards the tree of life, tree of immortality, who gives, life. And the Durga, the Divine Mother, when you guys are in India, I don't know if you guys saw, this goddess with the many arms, right? Who fights demons and conquers death and chaos for people. Her people who worship her. So the Ganges upper river, right? There's shrines that are dedicated to fertility gods and goddesses that continue to this day, right? Death is resolved here because life comes from here, from the Ganges. Right? Did you guys visit this river at all? Okay. So people bathe there, brush their teeth there. And there's also a temple of the living goddess, right? Where the window opens once or twice every day. And this girl called the Kumari, or the living goddess, right, comes out and kind of blesses and oversees the people. And the living goddess represents, like a bigger entity of a fertility goddess. And because, it's weird, like in fertility cults, the woman is either a mother or a virgin, right? And so this woman is, she's a little girl, a prepubescent teenage girl. And once she gets her period, she has to leave this temple where she's been living in all her life. And oftentimes she's just kind of out on her own, has to maybe do sex trafficking to survive. And so it's not a happy life for this child, but to these people, she represents the living goddess, right? Something about like the sexual purity, power of women that gives, blessings to the land until she has her period. And the goddess Artemis, and the ancient Greeks worshipped her. This was in one of the Turkey churches that my mom visited, and she just has a lot of breasts, right? Just all over her body, right? Which symbolize fertility and motherhood and breast milk, right? Like the land flowing with milk and honey, and yeah, totally. Okay, so yeah. So my mom thinks there's a connection between the smile of Artemis and the smile of Buddha as well. She thinks that there's Indian influence that reached, Buddhism as well. So, yes, so there's fertility goddesses and religions all over the world, right? It's not just Canaan, right? It's all over. In America, we have this Greek heritage as well. Hindu yogi, the sadhu, right? He has the third eye, right? And I think a common trait of fertility religions is that there's either like an extreme overindulgence of the flesh, right, or extreme denial of the flesh, right? Because when your body becomes the human body becomes the object of worship instead of God, right? You either try to control it really harshly or just like, whatever you want, yeah? So there's yogi who sometimes are really high, right? But they can do crazy things like walk on coal and not feel pain. Like they have like extreme relationships with their bodies. And I think it's kind of this larger picture of what happens when we worship human bodies instead of the God who made them. So Hindu temple is decorated with some of these images of sex. Yeah, so it's like religious pornography that represents sex as this act of worship, which the irony of it is, right? But it's not the sex that should be worshipped, it's the maker of it that should be worshipped, right? So just a lot of, no children in this room, right? Okay, so yeah, it's a lot of Hindu religious pornography, of tantrism, and there's a temple housing, male body parts, and what that symbolizes as well. So like this union of the male and female sexual organ, that's just enshrined, right, in this shrine, right, as an object of worship. Yeah. So so, and it's also a place where currently women who are infertile sometimes go and they have sex with the temple yogi, the men, right, to try to have, be able to have a child. And so it's, it's, some of this goes on today, and we're like, oh, wow, that's so bizarre. And it's deeply connected to the Canaan culture. But I think maybe that these kind of extreme forms of worshiping sex instead of the maker, right, are not too far off from what we do in our culture. Because, so I think the thing about homosexuality, right, and the brokenness of sexuality today, right, I think it's, when we look, like, I know, this is the point where, like, I know some people, I have some very good friends who are so much better moral people than I am, who happen to be gay, right? And they're probably sexually purer than I am, right? And they're gay, right? In terms of, history and all that. But I think it doesn't matter because oftentimes, like, oftentimes when the debates about homosexuality get tossed in, and what was that Ashley Madison scandal that happened recently, where like there's a website just for like people who want to have affairs outside of marriage, and some like theologians and pastors had to step down because their names were like found in this database, and some hacker released them, and it's like, and the people's like general reaction is like, see these Christian hypocrites, and they deny gay people the right to marry, and look what they're doing, right? I think when we've entered into a place where we either like consider the absolute denial of our bodies, or the like feeding of whatever it wants of our bodies, right, as a way to control it, because it like that's the most important thing to us. So we either do one or the other. When that happens, we end up becoming really either legalistic and really defining people based on your behavior versus who you are, right? And I think America is like this really weird mix of like extreme like moralism and legalism, and also just overindulgence, right, and tantrism. And I think it's really coming out today in the debate between the church and the gay community. And I think this is the threshold where we really need to cry out to God, right, and say, we are exactly that people who've betrayed you, right, many times over and over with the balls of Peor, with the gods of money and sex and body. Like, that's us. Like 100 times over, that's us. We're the Israelites. And yet you've still called us to go into the land, right? That didn't stop God from sending them into the land, right? It's like, oh, okay, you're that nation that did this thing with the ball of Peor, so you're not going. He didn't do that. The only time he stopped them was when they forgot their identity and why they existed in the first place, right? Failing and messing up as a church, sadly, we will continue down this path as a community, right? We will always have sexual sin that we struggle with as a community, as individuals. But God says that shouldn't stop you from continuing on in your mission, right? Of representing something that's different inside this culture, where sex is the object of worship and not God, yeah? Okay. Yeah, so it's a little outdated, but just to show, very outdated, but just to show, yes, like definitely worshiping sex and bodies over God is just, we do it all the time. It sells everything. It's cash, money in our culture. Okay. So let's go through Deuteronomy very briefly. Go with me to Deuteronomy with a pen, okay? And go to chapters 1 to 3 and mark it as a summary of past history. So Moses is saying, okay, so this is what happened so far, right? And Deuteronomy 4 through 26, he gives a summary of the laws to keep once the people are inside Canaan. And Deuteronomy ends with the end of Moses' life in 27 to 34, right? I think when I think of Moses, I do think a lot of first-generation Koreans in the Korean American church. And there are people who left behind a strong legacy for us to follow, right? If we can dare call ourselves Joshua and then Moses. And Moses, he dies without ever having set foot into the promised land, right? He dies right where he can see it, but he can't go. But he can send the next generation in. And Moses was also the guy who interceded on behalf of a people when God was like, let's just start over and start with your family, right? Moses could have been like, all right, all glory to me and my family and my name, and we will serve you, and my household will serve you. But he didn't. He interceded on behalf of the people that God was about to wipe out again, right? And I think that serves as a model and example for us. And also, I think, I know a lot of I don't know how it is like in California and LA churches, but on the East Coast, Korean American churches, there's like nothing bigger than the gap between the Korean kind of adult congregation and the kids, right? Even though we're not really kids, right, anymore, but the EM. And there's this like, this inability to really like come together in the mission of God because there's a big cultural gap, and there's this sense of like they always see us as this way, and they always see us as children, right? So I think when I think of Moses and kind of he speaks over and over and over and over again, there's some things about the first generation that I think I really want to be thankful for and say thank you for interceding on behalf of us. Thank you for leaving behind this legacy. But a big part of that is also just, okay, bye, and we have to go. Honoring that legacy means going, right? I think some parts of us are a little bit afraid to leave behind the very Korean, whatever that is, Christian heritage. I'm not speaking for everyone in this room. I'm sorry I keep on referring to Korean identity because there's so many different wonderful ethnic diversity in this room, and I love that. I'm so glad that this is happening. But I'm speaking to kind of the majority group that happens to be in this room. If you guys could think for your own ethnic groups as well. There's a need to be freed from that and move on and go ahead to the next chapter of God's mission, right? Whatever that is. In order for us to do that, we have to be fully, like, embracing the identity that God has given us. All right, now it's your turn, right? This has all been prepared so that you can go now. So Joshua is all about the conquest of that land. It's a unique book because it's the finishing point where the setting up part for the kingdom of God ends, and it's the unique point because it's the starting point for where the actual history of the established nation begins, right? Because we have the people, law, and land in Joshua. So they cross over finally. Okay, so bye, Moses. Thank you, Moses. And they cross over from the Moab plains, okay, and they go to the western side, and they conquer, starting from the base camp, right? So starting from kind of the middle area here, right? Can you see a mouse? Okay, so starting from this area, they go westward to Jericho, Gilgal, Jericho, right? And then they go north, and they go south, right? And that's the conquest, right? So the content of Joshua, grab a pen with me, okay? As we have 20 minutes left, we're going to use a wall and just go through Joshua. Okay, so conquest of Joshua, the base camp, Gilgal to Jericho to Ai. And the central area is the land of the Ephraims, right? And Ephraim is a major tribe, right? It's also Joshua's tribe. And a lot of the judges come from this tribe, not all of them. So this becomes a central location for this new nation in the beginning. So we have crossing the Jordan. If you just like skim with me throughout Joshua. So we have crossing the Jordan, right? Circumcision at Gilgal, right? Then Jericho moving westward, okay? Jericho, okay? And then Ai in chapter 8, right? And then finally, the central area is conquered. And then the southern cities. If you go to Joshua 10, right? Joshua 10:29, right? The southern cities are conquered. This is Caleb's tribe, the tribe of Judah, right? So the southern cities, I can't see the map. Southern cities, that's where Judah's land is, right? And Jerusalem, right? And then there's the north, okay? And that's pretty much it. So now the question of genocide. I think, so the normal pattern of war for people during this time is to go into a city, plunder, kill all the men, and keep the women and the small children who are too young to know anything and who can be raised as slaves by the new people. So the normal pattern is to go take everything, kill the warriors, like kill the men, and then keep the women and the children for slaves, right? But God says go and destroy everything. Destroy everyone, and sometimes even, and for Jericho, an extreme case, the livestock, right? It's like, what did the cows do? Right? What did the sheep do, right? And all the riches of that city as well. Don't keep it, any of it, right? Extreme, extreme, extreme. I think an example of this might be, so if I look at the Arab people, and this is so how many of you guys have been to like Dubai or the Emirates or like Oman or any of like the really wealthy Arab states? Okay, let's not go there then. Okay, so let's do an Asian example then. Okay, so how many of you guys have been to like Hong Kong or Shanghai or Tokyo? Okay, or New York City. We can do New York City. Okay, all right, New York City. Okay, and let's say that a neighboring group of people, right, who are very, very rural, have livestock, have never lived in a place where they can build latrines, right? So let's say that the people living in like really, really rural areas, like conquered New York City, or like Hong Kong or Shanghai, right? And the natural response is like, get me the best of everything and it's all mine now, right? So it's like let's take over the city as it is and just enslave the people and make them serve us, and now we rule them, and now everything they used to own now belongs to us. That's the normal response, right? And that was a normal response for, battle patterns during this context too. But God says, don't do that, right? Destroy everything and everyone, right? So it's extreme, and it also shows that, I think, at the bottom line, it shows that this battle wasn't about the plunder. That this battle wasn't about Israelites having more stuff. Because usually when we fight battles as humans, it's because we want that stuff that you have. That's why we fight, right? It's like you're controlling the water resource, but we need it, right? Or you're controlling the oil, we need that too, right? Diamonds, right? Resources, right? That's why we fight. But the reason for this battle, it wasn't about resources. Because God says, destroy all the resources, even the livestock, right? The valuable things, right? To show that this is a new reason for warfare. And the new reason for warfare is that God's kingdom is coming, it's unstoppable, and it's going to change everything, right? It's a statement that everyone can hear loud and clear, right? These people are different. They're like crazy or something, right? But this God and these people are different. They fight for different reasons, right? Right, so yeah, let's just, so putting aside Joshua for a second, so I come from a background of studying the Middle East, studying Arabic, loving Palestine, and living in places where, if you say Israel, people look at you and they say it's Palestine, right? And I am now, if you can say there's a political side, I think I'm on the Palestinian side, right? I think I see the struggle of these people for their freedom, for their land, and see it as this is something unjust that happened to them. But when I look at the heritage of the Arab church, right? Sadly, very, very, very sadly, right? There's a history there of Arab Christians being associated with the outside colonial powers that want to oppress the Arab people. Whether that's Egypt, right, where the Copts, they sided with Napoleon, right, or in Lebanon, right, the Maronite Christians sided also with the French and English. Or it's really, really different from Korea, where the Korean early Christians have a legacy of associating with anti-Japan colonial, anti-colonial movements. And I say this to say, like, the oppression of people matters in the history of the church. And the patterns that it was done in, and the way that it was done in, and if it was done in the name of God, but it was done for resources, that matters a lot. The Crusades matter a lot, yeah. The current wars happening in the Middle East right now, largely because of America's our need for a secure future for ourselves and our children. That has a lot to do with what's going on in the Middle East. And when I consider that, it's I don't know what to say to these Arab Christians or to Arab Muslims. So when I came back from Lebanon, I had a decision to make about my future, and so I considered studying Islamic studies in Chicago, or going to Georgetown and going to the grad school for foreign service and becoming a diplomat of some kind. And I met with someone who was a foreign service officer in Korea, and she was a Christian. And she told me, Susan, basically, she was very honest with me. And she said, look, if you want to proselytize on the job, right, meaning if you want to share the gospel while you're a foreign service officer of the United States, right, you probably can't, right? And especially in the Middle East, you cannot, right? And this is someone who's politically more like right than me, more conservative than me in terms of foreign policy, but she was saying, Susan, like, even I would have a hard time pushing U.S. foreign policy in the daytime and then meeting with local friends in the evening and telling them about Jesus. Because they would look at me and be like, you're an American foreign service officer. What are you doing telling me about what I should believe in? Yeah. And this is someone who's politically more conservative than me, right? And she's like, Susan, you are very angry and upset about U.S. policy in the Middle East, and you don't know half of it. She's like, you don't know. Yeah. So this is happening today, right? The church has a major, we are not the West, but we have a major influence on the West. And the West is doing something to this land of Canaan and these Semitic peoples, sometimes in the name of God, even in the name of democracy and freedom and good things, right? But it's really for resources. When we're honest about it, it's about our future and our children's future, which are so important. But it's about us. It's not about God. I don't have any solutions foreign policy-wise, right? But I think it's time that the Western church consider, like, as a whole, what impact are we having, if any, right? What are we attempting to have on Western foreign policy in the Middle East? And what impact is that having on missions to Muslims? Because we can say on Sunday, right, 1040 window, back to Jerusalem, right, the next stage, right? But if we're not doing anything else outside of the church as a Christian community to shape the policy of the nation that we live in, so that the message of the gospel is not ridiculous when it's told by Western missionaries in the Middle East, we're doing something wrong. So I had that decision to make about Chicago or Georgetown, and I realized I really, really wanted to go to Georgetown. And I was like, why do I want to be a diplomat? And I was like, yes, I love politics and, policy and stuff, but it's also because I can't imagine going back to the Middle East without some extra cushioning of security right now. Not that I suffered these huge, things, but when I was in Lebanon, it wasn't at war, and it's not like there were many bombings too close to me, but it was just, I felt scared physically almost every day. And whether that was street harassers who thought I was a domestic servant, because there was lots of maids from Philippines and Sri Lanka. And so when they see an Asian woman in Lebanon and much of the Middle East, they say "Como está ka?" And they're like, how much? Sex, how much? Yeah. And I hated it so much. And instead of being the model missionary, right, I would just yell at these people, curse at these people. And yeah, I think instead of conquering with love, right, I just walked away with bitterness. And so when I consider going back, I'm I want to go protected by some kind of a, not even just the physical protection that embassy personnel have, but just people watch out for you, and they, there's an extra layer there, socially, because you work for the U.S. government, right? But I knew that aside from that, I had to go back to the Middle East. If I were to go back, it would be to share the gospel, and no matter how much extra layer of security was around me, if the reason why I was there was impossible to do, right, because of this extra layer of security, because of this name of U.S. government worker, then I would have no reason to be there in the first place. So, and I also just love books, and I'm a nerd, and I want to do a PhD, so I chose Chicago. So I can't imagine going back to the Middle East as another broke, poor, powerless PhD student or a professor. And I don't know if I can do it without bitterness. I know I can just physically go, but I don't know if I can do it without bitterness, without fear, within love, right? And that's just me as an individual, let alone as a nation. But I think that's what we're called to do as a nation, right, as America. So if you could take some time to, it's kind of a really distant, far-off thing, but you guys have seen in the news about that Syrian refugee crisis, right? And recently that boy that washed up on shore trying to reach Greece, 3-year-old child. And yeah, this is the worst refugee crisis ever. Yeah. And it's happening largely because of our security and our desire to secure our future for ourselves and our children. Largely. You guys were in Jerusalem. Did you see the wailing wall? People are wailing and weeping there because the temple of God has been destroyed. And his glory should be there to shine out to all the nations, but there's only a ruined wall. And I am praying and crying out for the day when Jewish believers will mourn and cry and weep, because maybe some of the legacy of their forefathers and even of current Israel and of it has ruined the wall of the temple that should be occupied by Arabs, by ethnically Muslim people. I am waiting for the day when Americans will weep and cry, right? Because our desire for a better future and better security has ruined the temple of God, as it should be. We've taken away the seats that rightfully belong to our Arab and ethnically Muslim brothers and sisters. when I say ethnically Muslim, I mean this. In a large part of the world, Muslim isn't a choice. It's written on your identity card. And if I ask someone in Lebanon, what's your name? And they say, Mohammed bin, whatever. It's like, okay, so where are you from? I know exactly what his affiliation and political affiliation is. I don't personally, because I don't know all of them, but people do, right? You can tell by the name, by your region, because your religious background is not your choice. You're born into it as an ethnicity, whether that's Sunni or Shia, Alawite Shia, whatever that is, right? And if the majority of the Christian world is saying the cause that these Muslims are rallying around of the occupation of Palestine is just wrong, right? And if we're saying that these people, these Muslims, I've seen mission groups that pray in the Middle East, especially Korean mission groups, that go on short-term mission trips to like Muslim towns of the West Bank and say like, Munojora, Munojora, may the Satan's towns fall and may Jerusalem rise back up. I think that act is destroying the real temple of God, which is the nations coming together to worship him. If you're hindering a certain people group from coming to God because of your political eyeglasses, okay? So it's a little far off, but if we could take some time to pray on behalf of America, right? Because first, it's about us, right? And our desire for more air conditioning, more security, cheaper oil, right? Better future, cheaper products, that keeps U.S. foreign policy where it is, that keeps our brothers and sisters in the ethnically Muslim world from seeing God as a God of justice and love. Right? So if we could pray on behalf of this nation, right?